Juvenile offenders with serious crimes, violent crimes, has been something that we have talked a lot about. The headlines have been just kind of screaming at us the last few years, carjackings and things like that. I'm curious, and even our investigative team, our Paul Bloom, has done a deep dive. He had a whole series called Nowhere to Go, where we talk about just the system-wide failure, the infrastructure failure that we have here in the state to adequately take care of / rehabilitate these young offenders. Where do they go? I'm curious, through your eyes, what have you seen, and where do we even start to make some progress in that space?
Yeah, Paul Bloom did an excellent job on that story, and it is a total systems failure. I think where people get confused maybe is because it is very complicated. We have a number of youth in the system. The youth that Paul's story was about are usually 10, 11, 12, 13, and they have committed violent crimes. And what happens is, if we charge them, or when we have charged them, they are found not by us, but by a psychologist, to be incompetent to proceed. What that means is, whether you are a child or an adult, we cannot proceed with criminal charges against you unless you are legally competent. And the issue arises that you got kids. I mean, think about this, Amy. Like, if you were trying to describe something complex like the legal system to a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, do you think that they would really understand it? Okay. And just developmentally, they typically do not. So many of those kids are incompetent. What that means is that they cannot be held at the juvenile detention center legally. They cannot be held. Some of the hearings that Paul has been on, the county is actually holding young people in the JDC illegally. Yeah. The issue is this: if we cannot prosecute them because they're not competent, what is done with those kids? And our frustration is this: in the past, far too often they've been let out in the care of mom, grandma, parents, whatever, and then they continue to engage in violent, risky behavior. And we have advocated over and over that there needs to be placements for those kids who are not safe to be in the community, because they do continue to engage in behavior that's inappropriate and risky. We don't have those resources right now, but I would say I and our office have been a leading advocate for those resources, because it's a small group of kids, by the way, but any MPD officer, our office, can tell you the names of those children. And there needs to be something done, but there aren't the resources now. Where I would say my frustration comes in is that there are many unhelpful narratives out there. And I know you've heard them, and I know you've interviewed the chief. And sometimes he tends to talk about a revolving door, claiming that we don't charge kids and that kind of thing. And I think that's very unhelpful and not true. And it's one of those narratives I talked about in my video and when I interviewed with Strib. We need to have candid conversations about what's actually happening in the system. And that doesn't mean we're pointing fingers. It means we need to identify the gaps in the system. So let's give car theft as an example. In 2023, I think we had about 7,500 car thefts in Minneapolis. The Minneapolis police were able to bring us, for potential charging, less than 2% of those cases, so less than 200. We know, or research says, deterrence is really about the certainty of being caught. Deterrence is actually not about long sentences or sentences. It is about whether you think you're going to get caught. So if you are somebody stealing cars and you know the certainty of getting caught is less than 2%, there's absolutely no deterrence there, right? So, and these are also cases where, sometimes there's a lot of blame put on our office or the judicial system, but we traditionally haven't been able to do anything if the police aren't bringing us a case. And so, and I've heard the chief say this, that oh, it's the same juveniles. And I've heard you interview him where it's the same juveniles and nothing ever happens to them. And I kind of wish I could jump through the screen and say, Chief, how many of those juveniles have you actually submitted to our office for charging? How many? Because the truth of the matter is car theft is very difficult for police to solve for a number of really good reasons. Often they're a group of kids, they're wearing the same clothing, they all ditch the car, they run away. People who have cars stolen may not have a good description. There are all kinds of really good reasons why police are having a hard time sending us cases for potential charging. But that also means we have to be honest about it. That they're not sending us these cases for charging. And so we need to look at, which we did, what can we do then? And this is where our, I think, one-of-a-kind program in the country, our Youth Auto Theft Initiative, came into being. Because we heard from law enforcement across Hennepin County that they were having a hard time getting us cases to charge. But we were also being told by crime analysts that the time, and we're talking about kids 10, 11, 12, 13, the time it takes for them to escalate into more violent behavior is a matter of months. So before I came into office, if the police could not bring us a case to charge, we would have said there's nothing that we could do. But we couldn't live with that, knowing that the behavior would escalate into harm against somebody else. So we created an initiative where we said to police, you know, we know you can't bring us the cases, but we also know you know the names of these kids. If you could just give us the names, we will run them through our databases. We'll see if they're getting any services from the county at all. And what was surprising to me was that half those young people were not receiving services. So we used our social worker at the time, and now it's embedded social workers, but we're able to reach out to the parent, the guardian, and say, hey, your kid's on our radar screen. You know, what do you think of that? And 100% of those parents said, I know, I'm not surprised my kid's on your radar screen, please help. And at that point, we could then refer to various services, whether it was mental health, housing security, substance use, you know, whatever that family and that child needed to try to stabilize the situation so that kid would not be stealing cars. And after a year and about 3 months, we looked at the data, and that had a success rate of 81%. And I challenge anybody to come up with probably better statistics than that in the criminal legal system. I think right now, you know, we started that in my first year. We're probably at 67, 62%, something in there. But that is an example of an effective program, an effective intervention where we are actually reaching out to kids whose cases aren't coming to us, and we're offering them services through the county that help them keep out of the system. So I'm a big believer in really talking about the truth of what's happening, where any of our departments might be having problems, you know, getting us cases, you know, solving cases and stuff like that. And so that has been a frustrating narrative when it's more pointing fingers at us or the courts, when we really ought to be talking about what the issue is. And if I move back to those incompetent kids, here is a place where police and us and others could say, hey, we see these kids all the time. We know they're out here. We know they desperately need help. They have complex needs. You guys got to do something. We could all join in that, and it would be an effective narrative. It would be something that the community should expect from us, to work together to speak in a united voice about what we need to keep the community safer. But that hasn't happened because of these narratives of pointing fingers at everybody else.